Have you ever had enemies you couldn't defeat and wanted to learn martial arts techniques to confront them? Well, it turns out that there's a chance that you can, by watching a series of films dedicated to paving the way for a learning experience that might appear brutal, but in the end, it's helpful. Maybe it will also make you realize that you don't want to go through all that trouble and find some peace inside you. The films I'm talking about are none other than the Shaw Brothers trilogy of the 36th Chamber of Shaolin films, and they will change how you think about revenge. Let's go through the complete lore of the 36th Chamber of Shaolin and explore the arc of 3 different individuals who managed to find their way using the lessons of the Shaolin Temple. But before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. The birth of a legend, Shaw Brothers, martial arts cinema, and the rise of the 36th Chamber. Martial arts cinema has become a broad topic nowadays, with new projects coming out every month in this genre and becoming box office hits. But no name resounds in the genre as profoundly and with as much influence as the Shaw Brothers studio. You might have heard of Chad Stahelski's transition from a stuntman to one of the most innovative and successful directors in recent years. However, the Shaw Brothers studio started this trend as they had martial artists directing projects and spreading stories that looked authentic, and this ended up becoming a point of reference for generations of films to come. Founded by Renja Shaw and his brothers in 1924, the studio became a cinematic powerhouse by producing over 1,000 films that worked on the kung fu genre. At a time when they were shot on film cameras, these movies worked on aspects like choreography and the idea of intertwining Chinese cultural elements with history and mythology, thus adding depth to the already popular genre. However, the production reached a new level of popularity when Lau Kar-leung joined in as a director. Being a martial artist himself, Lau played an essential role in elevating the authenticity of the genre, and his 1978 film, The 36th Chamber of Shaolin, proves that rather well. The film wasn't just a cinematic achievement because it became a cultural phenomenon, and the variety of elements it brought to the genre resonated with a global audience. So let's jump into the storyline of one of the best trilogies in cinematic history. The 36th Chamber of Shaolin. Character evolution of San Te. The 36th Chamber of Shaolin is set in the early Qing Dynasty China during the Manchu occupation. San Te, or our friend Liu Yuda's story, begins somewhere around Canton, the southern city with strong Han Chinese cultural roots and a place known to have a growing resentment against the Manchu regime. When the film starts, we witness some effects of the time when the Manchu government had consolidated power through their violent suppression by targeting the intellectuals, dissidents, martial artists, and anyone else who felt like a threat. They started monitoring educational institutions, and those who showed signs of cultural and political resistance were persecuted. It's important to know this because later on it becomes much clearer how the Shaolin Temple played a significant role in the clash between the Han resistance and the Manchu authority. We begin with San Te's arc, then known as Liu Yuda, as a young activist who gets caught in the rebellion against the government as he joins the rebels under the guidance of his teacher, and the uprising gets crushed. But things only get worse after that, as Liu's friends and family are killed, and the idea of avenging the fallen completely drives him. To seek this justice, he decides to go to the Shaolin Temple, dedicated to learning kung fu and using his martial prowess to get revenge. But it's not that easy to get into the Shaolin Temple, because that is an essential part of San Te's arc and the Shaolin Temple as a whole. When Liu arrives at the Shaolin Temple, he is wounded, and even though they allow him to rest for a while, they reject him as an outsider and are very hesitant to let him into the temple. But after quite a bit of deliberation, they decided to let him in under the orders of the chief abbot, who showed him mercy. Liu adopts the name San Te here, and thus begins his transformation journey from someone desperately seeking revenge to someone who will become much more calm and calculated. The Shaolin Temple is known for its extensive training regimen. There are 35 chambers of the Shaolin Kung Fu, and each deals with a particular aspect of the martial arts, discipline, or philosophy. Being a fresher, Sante joins from the very first chamber, where his dedication is tested and he proves his resilience and determination. The first few chambers deal with aspects such as balance, arm strength, wrist strength, eyesight, and head strength. But it's important to note that none of these chambers require some sort of mad skill to achieve. It's all about strength, will, and determination, as Sante proves when he dedicates himself to finding a solution instead of giving up with every challenge. Sante goes through a significant change when he reaches the higher chambers. With that, there's a considerable change in his body and mind as he converts from someone focused on revenge to someone dedicated to understanding the Shaolin's deeper values. A particular event that proves his dedication is when the discipline chief, someone who had always felt off about Sante, challenged him to exhibition matches. Sante loses repeatedly, but he's not ready to give up, as it would not allow him to get a leadership position. So, during one of his practice sessions, he improved the 3-section staff, a version of a nunchaku with 3 solid bits, or another solid bit in the middle. Sante masters this weapon the moment he manages to work it out, and then he uses the flexible yet powerful tool to overcome his previous fears and win over the discipline chief. Thus, he becomes the overseer of one of the Shaolin's chambers. That's a lot for someone who had stumbled upon the Shaolin Temple as a part of his plan for seeking revenge. But then we deal with the psyche, as now he has to fight the internal battle regarding the revenge he had once planned. As a profound decision, he proposes to the chief abbot that a 36th chamber be introduced to allow the ability to train the masses, the common people, oppressed by the Manchu government. These people will learn the basics of Kung Fu and defend themselves. However, the idea goes entirely against the Shaolin Temple's work, since the other temple chambers are exclusive to Shaolin monks. In contrast, he wanted to create an inclusive space serving the community. It's made clear that such an idea is radical, and the chief abbot realizes that the path that Sante intends to take doesn't align with his vision for the future, so he expels Sante, but in a manner where he would still be allowed to go through with his plan somehow. Sante returns to his hometown, and after reuniting with some of his known people, he starts establishing a place where the ordinary villagers can learn Kung Fu, which marks the creation of the proposed idea for the 36th chamber. He manages to show the teachings he had gotten to the people so that they can fight the authoritative powers using their knowledge. But his arc concludes when he goes against General Tin Ta, the man responsible for the suffering Sante had experienced, the loss of his friends and family. One might imagine that the battle here would be an ultimate test of skills, but it was a lot more than that, because it almost appears that Sante manages to keep his calm, even though the individual had managed to give him the utmost pain. Sante uses his mastery and strategic mind on Tin Ta. The event does fulfill vendetta, and it stands for the triumph of justice over tyrannical rule. Sante finally returns to the Shaolin Temple and establishes the 36th chamber, which will be for people like him who are lost in the chaos and driven by their anger. The 36th chamber becomes a gift to the Shaolin Temple and the people who has made him the person he has now become, thus ending the journey of Sante. Returning to the 36th chamber, comedy, subversion, and the imposter hero. Now we get to the second story in these films, and this time around, we're taken into another similar story like Liu Yu Da, but with an interesting twist. We arrive at a time when the Manchu still runs the empire, and we witness a factory owner by the name of Wang, who employs some of these Manchu mercenaries to supervise the labor in his factory due to the poor quality of the work. As a result, the employee wages are reduced, and when they protest against it, they are given brutal punishments handled by the Manchu overseers. Chu Zhenqia, a con artist who hears about this, decides to help these laborers and disguises himself as a Buddhist monk to help them out. How, you ask? Zhenqia might be lacking martial arts prowess, but he is sensitive to the plight of the workers, and he decides to impersonate a legendary Shaolin monk, the abbot of the 36th Chamber of Shaolin, Sante, and then demand the rightful treatment of these workers and confront Wang with a threat of spiritual and physical reprisal. The plan works. It helps that Gordon Liu plays Zhenqia disguised as Sante, the character he played in the previous film. Zhenqia successfully intimidates the boss bosses using his disguise and then scares the Manchu overseers, indicating that Sante is back in town. But it doesn't last that long, considering Wang sees through the guys, and thus Zhenqia is exposed as a fraud and then humiliated publicly. This failure further impacts the workers, who are treated more horribly than before. Zhenqia runs off with his guilt and decides to seek proper training by going to the Shaolin Temple and thus learn Kung Fu for real. But unlike Sante, who committed differently to be taught at the Shaolin Temple, Zhenqia sticks to his con artist tricks to find a means to enter the temple. After multiple failed attempts to enter the temple, he is finally confronted by the real Sante. Sante presents him with a challenge involving building a network of scaffolding around the temple for renovation purposes. Zhenqia had arrived there to learn Kung Fu, but he still agreed to the challenge and got to work. Even though he's reluctant, this work becomes his wax-on, wax-off moment as he watches the various drills inside the temple and begins imitating them using the tools and his surroundings from his elevated position. Eventually, his mimicry becomes an improvised regimen, and he develops a new style based on construction work. The physical regimen that he has been put through, coupled with the strong sense of discipline and curiosity to learn, his muscles, and the movements that he had worked on start to refine. So he transforms into someone who wasn't molded in the training halls of the Shaolin Temple, but in the bamboo frame along with his sweat and solitude. It takes a year to complete the work, and after he's done, Sante glances at him and asks him to dismantle the structure and leave. Completely disillusioned by this response, Zhenqia rebels against this order. During this confrontation, he falls into the 36th chamber, where the trials for aspiring monks are taking place. While the others are tested for the skills they have developed while working through every chamber before this one, Zhenqia gets tested on the techniques he has created. Funnily enough, he manages to use the skills he has honed during his labor and evades the tests with a surprising finesse. Now, when he's ordered to leave, Zhenqia leaves as a man who has learnt something and has developed his own style out of the labor he was put through. Zhenqia returns to his village, and here things have only worsened, and the entire town has been demoralized by the circumstances. His arrival spreads across the city, and people accumulate around him with desperate expectations. Zhenqia manages to show his skills to the people, and they observe the force and precision he has acquired through his blows, indicating that he has become what he had pretended to be the last time they saw him. Finally, he returns to the mills and fights off the overseeing men using bamboo, and thus his name reaches Wang. Wang and his men arrive to confront him, and once again, Zhenqia disposes of them one by one using his style of Kung Fu that he had developed and manages to defeat them. In the end, he confronts Wang, who agrees to reinstate the wages and cease the violent repression. But Zhenqia returns to the mansion to continue learning through the tools of labor, and the work continues. Disciples of the 36th Chamber, Shaolin's final trial. We come to the final chapter in the 36th Trilogy. With each new entry, we reach a completely different student from a completely different perspective, learning to determine their future. This time, we come across a teenager named Fang Saiyuk, a martial artist but a poor student, and always ready to create some trouble in a school run by his father. However, the testing times brought us to the Manchu officials who intended to shut down the school as one of their power moves against the Han Chinese population. Saiyuk, being the troublemaker, makes matters worse by picking a fight with one of the leaders of the Manchus. But thankfully, his mother arrives and decides to take matters into her own hands by figuring out a solution that could help the school and keep Saiyuk's father's honor amongst the people. She bargained with the Shaolin monk Sante in order to provide refuge for her son at the 36th Chamber of Shaolin. Even though the deal works out, Saiyuk continues to be in trouble as he's proud and hardly has any respect for the authority his mother handed him over to. Saiyuk breaks various rules of the Shaolin Temple, including the one where he goes out every night while his fellow students are fast asleep. Each of these times, he boasts about his experiences and then talks about his various adventures to his friends. But one of these times, he is caught by the Manchu officials and reprimanded. But Sayuk uses his arrogance and decides to use whatever he's learnt on them. Surprisingly, everything he has learnt comes through, and he defeats everyone easily. The head of the Manchu decides to befriend Sayuk to get more information about what has been happening inside the Shaolin Temple, and plans to kill Sayuk once he has acquired every bit of knowledge from him. Sayuk falls into the trap and starts revealing the secrets of the Shaolin to the Manchu people regularly. Each time he arrives, he is treated nicely, making him feel as if he's important to them, and they instantly manage to get something out of him about life in the temple, be it the lifestyle inside or some kung fu technique. But this time, the Manchu leader has a bigger trap set as he invites Sayuk and his friends to his daughter's wedding in the town, and Sayuk conveys the same to his friends and other pupils. While it sounds like a friendly gesture, the true intention behind this plan was to poison all of them and completely remove the threat that the Shaolin Temple posed to the Manchu people. Sante becomes suspicious of these developments and decides to intervene, but fails to convince Sayuk about the true intentions of the Manchu leader. Ultimately, he decides to go to the wedding himself to prove the true colors of the Manchu once and for all. Once there, a fierce battle occurs between the Shaolin students and the Manchus once the true motives of the Manchu leader are revealed. Sayuk is shown to have been caught in a trap, and Sante brings all the students, including Sayuk, to the Shaolin Temple. Finally, Sayuk realizes his mistake and the grave mistake he was going to make, so he mends his ways and decides to become more humble in the process. He adheres to the lifestyle that is fitting for someone at the Shaolin Temple, and eventually changes into the student that Sante wanted him to be. A legacy carved in Wutong steel, the 36th Chamber and global hip-hop culture. It's important to note that each story in the series of films had a unique story to tell, considering each of the protagonists was shown their way through direct learning or through a subtle manner involving hard work. Now, fans aren't as indulged in the rest of the films in the trilogy as much as the first entry. But then again, the first film is also the most serious one in the trilogy. At its core, each film is about resistance, whether with the self or politically. At the same time, it does manage to delve deeper into the true spirituality associated with the Shaolin Temple. There was a time when the temple monks defended the empire against foreign invaders. Still, this time, they provided the necessary tools to the common people to fight these invaders. Throughout the trilogy, Sante becomes an important character since the story still revolves around him and his established 36th Chamber, which has become the place where these common people could weaponize themselves with the knowledge and the technique to go against the oppressors. As I said, the film was a complete phenomenon that changed how the world saw martial arts. Earlier, it was only associated with the fighting skills and the techniques, but Sante's story, along with the others, proved that it had multiple layers, and each layer adhered to the story of a different person and how they fought their own demons to clear their path. These films and Bruce Lee's Enter the Dragon proved that there was much more than just fighting in the culture the movies were trying to introduce. Each time, the enemy was brought down through a different technique that had nothing to do with being a masterful fighter, but someone who was in control of themselves and able to achieve a larger peace through their methods. One of the major influences the films had was on the formation of the rap group Wu-Tang Clan, and as a tribute, the group named their first album Enter the Wu-Tang 36 Chambers. The thing that related to them the most on a personal level, according to the group leader RZA, was it was beyond the kung fu and the fantasy of it. It was something about the reality of the situation that struck me. In fact, RZA would cast the actor in his film, The Man with the Golden Fists, in a major role. He would go on to explain his association with the actor and state, "To think of when I watched the movie The 36th Chamber of Shaolin, which became the title of our first album, Gordon Liu had played a character called Master Killer, where he had to go to Shaolin to learn how to fight to get revenge for his family. But when he got to Shaolin, he started at the 35th chamber, but he wanted to go to the top. And when he got to the top, the monks weren't doing kung fu, they were teaching philosophy, and the philosophy that they taught was actually very profound. Now Gordon Liu is known for fighting, in Kill Bill and all of his films, but when I came to him for the role, I said, Gordon, I want you to play that monk that you see in 36 Chambers. Not the monk who fought, but the monk who disseminates all the wisdom." He thought about that, and he's a real Buddhist and everything, so he agreed to do it. It was an honor and a privilege for me. I came to find out that he was a musician, so I gave him a guitar. And we had a great time. He really helped this film a lot. For me, it was a blessing to have him. Marvelous verdict. The 36th Chamber of Shaolin was probably the first time I had an idea that there's no perfect way to learn how to fight my enemies, but the real enemy is inside us, waiting for a chance to come out. In the end, the battle with the self proves to be the most important, as we learn more about ourselves and figure out a solution to end it once and for all. By the way, Quentin Tarantino is also a big fan of the films, and went on to cast Gordon Liu for both the entries in the Kill Bill trilogy as a menacing teacher who manages to mold Uma Thurman's character into a complete warrior. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.